Welcome to our Faculty Spotlight, a podcast aimed at giving listeners an insider's view into the brilliant minds and expertise of Northwood University's distinguished faculty members. Over the course of this series, we explore a wide range of topics from business and economics to entrepreneurship and innovation. Each episode features in-depth conversations with professors who share insights, research, and experiences to educate, inspire, and engage our listeners. Today's episode features Dr. Christin Greiman, who chairs our management program at Northwood University. Welcome, Dr. Greiman.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and it's always so much fun when we learn more about your expertise, which is in leadership development.
Yes.
Love to hear a little bit more about that. But first, maybe you could tell us how you became interested in the subject in the first place and how you chose a career in higher education.
Sure. I took a less direct route than most people when I got out of undergrad, which I went to Hope College for biology, and I graduated in 3.5 years. So I tried to kind of compress my experience. I started playing basketball, but then didn't the whole time because I was a science major. And it was really hard to get in my labs and also play basketball. So I chose not to continue with basketball and graduated in 3.5 years with a BS in biology and an emphasis in chemistry and Spanish. And then I went out into the real world and I worked at a pharmaceutical company. And I worked my way up into R&D and loved it. And then my husband said, he kind of hit a plateau in his career and he said, I'm going to come to Midland, Michigan. And I said, where is that? Because I grew up on the East Coast. And so he came here and that led me to Midland, where I worked at Dow for a little bit in a lab. And then we decided to have kids. And so I thought I should not be playing with chemicals. And so I thought, what do I do now? And my mom said, why don't you go get your MBA? And I thought, okay, what are my options? And that is where I found DeVos. And so then I went and got my, while I did some technical writing as a consultant, I got my MBA at DeVos. And then right on the week that I graduated, one of my professors said, would you be interested in becoming an adjunct? And I said, what is an adjunct? And so then I learned all about higher education. And so from there, I started as an adjunct at Northwood for 5 years. And then the opportunity came that if I wanted a full-time position, I should go get my doctorate. And so I went and got my doctorate. And so I took kind of a less direct route, but I think it was good for me to come back after years of experience in the workforce to be able to apply those examples. So I think it helped me both in my graduate school, but it also helps me now in teaching in that I can bring in a variety of examples from, I worked for a family-owned company to a Fortune 500 company. So all of that kind of comes into play when we use examples in the classroom.
Yes, you really exemplify what we prize at Northwood University, which is faculty members who have that real world, significant professional experience to bring the concepts alive in the classroom.
Yes.
So how about leadership development? How did you decide on that as your area of expertise or specialty?
Sure. I think there have been a variety of opportunities that have come up in my life where I am not necessarily the first person to volunteer. And so in joining leadership development, it really taught me about the starters who want to be the CEOs, but also how to support the middle managers and the people who want to make a difference. And I think that's how that tied into Northwood is the opportunity to choose. And so having the opportunities to lead programs like a study abroad, we learned both about leaders in the United States, but then I could parallel that to opportunities across the seas. So at Northwood, we give our students lots of opportunities to become leaders. So we've had things where maybe an accounting major helps with the fashion show. And an opportunity came up for me to help lead the study abroad to Ireland a few years ago. And so I co-advised that one. And from there, some of my students said, well, what about Iceland? I've always wanted to go to Iceland. And I thought, okay, how can we tie that into what we teach at Northwood? And so I said, okay, if you can get 6 people who want to go to Iceland, I will figure out a way to lead this course. And so we did. And I think it was a great way for students, once again, from a variety of majors to apply their leadership skills, their analysis of both U.S. companies and then abroad, how things were run different based on governmental policies, financial goals, et cetera. And so I think a lot of them came back with entrepreneurial ideas that they could use in the U.S. based on that opportunity to study abroad.
Well, and our mission at Northwood University is to develop free enterprise leaders who drive global economic and social progress. And so that global piece really comes to light when you mention how a student just had an idea and wanted to go to Iceland. What was one of the most interesting things you saw when you were in Iceland?
Oh, I think it was the variety of restaurants and their approaches based on either appealing to the local customers, but then the tourism industry, because tourism is such a big part of their economy. A lot of the restaurants made a strategic choice to either say, we're going to offer these traditional meals to more local
Which would be
customers.
what kinds of things?
Oh, a lot of fish-based, but all local sourced ingredients. Like there's a big tomato greenhouse. And so we learned about, okay, even though it's this very cold, isolated island, how do they bring in food? And so how does that change how they make and prepare foods and the inputs to restaurant success? And then on the other side, you had these tourist type locations located in the bigger cities. And so from there, they combined the local ingredients. So like one had a pizza place, but they used some of the lava and the black salts that they harvest from the seas, and then they incorporate that into the pizza crust. So it looked completely burnt, but it was a black crust pizza. And so there were interesting, unique things.
Wild and fun.
And then there was a salt company that we got to visit, and they harvest just ocean water, but they turn it into one of the most sustainable salts, and they outsource it all over the world. And so it's learning about those small business ideas that can go global in a very short amount of time that were really interesting, I think, to the students.
Well, and I love that you said that they came away with entrepreneurial ideas after doing the study abroad too.
Yeah.
So this is one of the biggest questions of the day. What qualities are companies or employers looking for in effective leaders?
Yes, we just
and I know that we're focusing on helping our students gain those qualities and competencies.
Yes, we use our advisory board to give us insights into what they're looking for in recent graduates. And in the past, they've talked about leadership skills, and of course, everyone defines a leader differently, what they're looking for. But the one component that we're seeing, especially recently, is critical thinking. And so it's everyone can memorize a definition. I can teach you management concepts. They're not that hard in learning the concepts. It's learning how to apply the concepts that's the hard part. And so we have learned from our advisory council, from internships that students choose, that their managers are looking for the students who can apply the concepts, who understand why they're choosing one benefit package over the other. Why they're choosing how they choose to reward their students, right? What rewards have short-term incentives and which ones have long-term benefits. And so I think by giving them the choice, in our management classes, one that just finished up in one of my classes, I give them the choice to pick any project they want, as long as they can relate 200 points worth of content back to the subject. And some of them
chose...
That's a
lot of freedom.
It is.
And so, probably a lot of pressure.
It is. So some of them choose, if they want to start their own business, they chose who I was, who I am, and who I want to be. And so they analyzed, okay, if I ran my business when I was in high school, this is what it might look like, but this is what it looks like now in college, but this is what I want to do after I graduate. Some students chose to compare and contrast two companies. So if you do Iceland, you could compare and contrast a pizza shop in Iceland compared to the US. Some of them, we have a fun one where we switch CEOs. So say, what if President McDonald were to be the CEO of Michigan State, and then Michigan State's CEO would come to Northwood? How would they change their leadership practices, and how would it impact both their advisory board, their students, et cetera? And so they can pick different topics based on what they're interested in. But it also puts a little bit, as you mentioned, a little bit more pressure on them to say, well, what did I learn? How do I apply this? And how do I convince my instructor that I understand the material? I didn't just memorize the definitions. So I think that's the number one skill, is critical thinking.
Yeah. What's one of the most interesting projects that has come out of that assignment?
Oh, I did have a student do the who I was, who I am, and who I want to be because her family owns a company. And the interesting part about it was she wanted to leave out the where I think the company will be in the next 5 years because she was a little bit worried. She wanted to have a conversation with her brother first. And so she wanted to say, okay, based on what I see and what I've learned, here are the topics that I think we need to address before you take over. And so to me, it was interesting in that she could actually apply it and go talk to her brother in a constructive way to say, these are the great things I've learned at Northwood, and here's how I think our business will be better if we can implement these as a team instead of letting one person just kind of take it over.
Yeah. And that could change the trajectory of that whole organization
Yeah.
and their prospects for future success, because generational transitions are perilous times for family businesses.
And we right, one of our new dissertations is about the transgenerational. She has that as her dissertation focus. So it'll be interesting to hear her story.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because you have been advising to some of the doctoral students in the DeVos Graduate School of Management at Northwood University too, haven't you?
Not recently, but I believe some of the topics that are coming up might be. But yes, I just got to teach as an adjunct, but I went back and taught a class this fall. So it was good for me to go back and see what changes they've made and really see how I can now help our classes kind of be a pipeline into their new focus of classes that they're providing now. And so it's always nice too to see some of the undergrad students who become grad students. Sometimes they're student athletes. Sometimes they're students who came out of undergrad, maybe worked for 5 years, and then they come back and say, okay, I'm ready for a change, or I'm ready to take the next step into becoming a manager. So,
well, it's almost like each student is a case study.
Yes.
Yeah. What are some student successes and when they've graduated that really stand out for you that you've had the privilege of working with?
Sure. We have everything. Management is so broad. I've talked to Bryce Rucker. He is a student who actually.
Bryce Rucker. Yes, I
Yes.
remember him.
He became a lawyer. And so, you don't always think of, okay, someone with a management degree would go into law school. But
apparently, the Bar Association says business is one of the best majors for undergrads going into law.
Exactly. And so he went the law route. Kirsten Sebastian is out in the world. Every time I look at her LinkedIn page, she's having an amazing accomplishment. So she's worked with sea life and out in that environment, and then business. The Bong twins are both doing some great success globally. So I think the nice thing about the management major is it's so broad, and I know every professor thinks that their major is the best, but I truly believe that the concepts you learn in management will benefit you throughout your career, both when you first graduate, but then I think, 5-10 years down the line, you go, oh yeah, I am going to use this. And I have had students, I think maybe that's one of my proud moments is I've had a couple students come back to me maybe 2 years later and say, I used what we learned in class in an interview. Can you send me that follower chart? Because that's going to help me relate to my boss.
The follower chart. Could you describe that? Because there's so much about leadership, but also followership is a skill set, isn't it?
Sure. Yes. In most of my classes, we start with Goleman's 6 leadership styles. And so we kind of set that as a precedence, but then we talk about what follower type does that create? And also how do you react to the different leadership styles? So it's when someone is commanding, what type of follower type are you? And so you can kind of look at it from both perspectives so that you can't change other people, but you can change your behavior according to, right? Someone who's a pace setter likes quick wins. So you're not going to go give them a 4-page answer when they ask you a question. You're going to give them a brief response. And so we talk about then bulleting items when you communicate with your boss. And so I think identifying the type of follower you are ties back into the choices that Northwood has, right? It's all about your choice, but then owning your choices. So when you come to class, what type of follower are you? Okay, maybe today you're a survivor. And so that means you're not going to do your A game, but you chose that because maybe you had a big project the class before, and so we talk about, okay, well, that's your choice, but then how do you change or address the consequences of those choices going forward?
I love how you've described the management curriculum as something our students customize according to their own interests. And that's infused throughout the entire curriculum, of course, but you've really brought it to life as to how students have chosen their own path within that major, and you allow them to follow their passion.
Yes, we have 2 new electives that both from the advice of our advisory board. One was an upper level human resource class, so we call that performance management. And then the other one I'm very proud of is analyzing strategic failures. So as we came out of COVID, we found that analyzing why companies failed will actually help other companies succeed. And so we tie that in. We have a whistleblower from Daimler Chrysler who teaches our ethics.
Dr. David Bezzetta.
Yes. Yeah. So he teaches our ethics class, and he is now going to teach that class, the Analyzing Strategic Failures. And I think that's another benefit of our management major is we bring in people from the real world. So Brian Klott is a new adjunct in human resources, and he's actually dealing with some of the labor disputes right now. And so we have these students, or professors, sorry, who come in with real world experience. Thomas Kratzen has dual citizenship with Germany and the US, and he runs a company overseas, and then he comes and teaches for us. And Professor Warner was a city commissioner in Ohio, and so he has kind of that angle from out of state and also a government angle. And then Professor Zinkweg recently retired from Dow Chemical, or Dow, I suppose. And so he brings in that recent global perspective. You know, he lived in Switzerland, he's from Canada, so he brings in that angle as well. And so once again, they get to choose which professor they're going to learn best from. And in some of the required classes, they'll get those different perspectives from taking a class with me versus a class with Professor Zinkweg, et cetera.
So many different facets that are covered. So what have you been reading lately?
I am looking forward to the OmniQuest book for spring is Leadership and Self-Deception. And so we read the OmniQuest book this semester from Ramaswamy, and then that book will be in the spring. So I am probably this semester, I've focused more on podcasts and webinars. I've been reading up on AI because I know that it's coming.
It's a reality.
Exactly. And so how can we use this constructively in the classroom? So we talk about, how do we set our students apart by being leaders and having experience working with it so that it's not a plagiarism issue, it's something that added value to the content that they can propose. Some of the presentations I had this last week were some of the best organized presentations, and that's because they used AI to say, help me create an outline. What kind of introduction and conclusion can I put together so that my content is organized and more interesting for the classmates?
Well, that sounds like we ought to bring you back for a future podcast to hear more about that. That just sounds absolutely fascinating about how you're helping our students use AI constructively in the classroom. Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, our time is up already, Christin. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to our listeners and viewers for joining us on our podcast. And we look forward to you joining us next time, wherever you get your podcasts, to hear more about what's going on with our exceptional faculty at Northwood University. And Christin, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.